thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and student activities.
All the factors are useful.
Welcome to this afternoon's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, at the top of the show, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, texts, and emails concerning previous guests and subject matters we've covered here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for topics, guests, and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this year's your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, proudly in its 29th season. We have a great show for you this evening. We're going to look at an aspect of our lives, both personal, professional, and public, that can lend some kind of understanding, perhaps, to us in a very divided community and in a very divided world, about this subject called leadership, and how we can begin to understand leadership perhaps in a way that we have not looked at it before. Some of the concepts are new, some of the concepts are very old around this issue of leadership. And joining me to help us kind of walk through this wonderful thing called adaptive leadership is none other than Judy Lee, who is the president of Take Root. She is an ALF facilitator, and Sally Harris King, who is a senior occupational therapy associate for Harris Health and also a recent ALF graduate. She's now a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum. Welcome to both of you. It is a wonderful thing to have you this afternoon and to be able to spend some time with you looking at this issue of adaptive leadership. And so I guess I'll just ask Julie, go ahead and kind of dive in and kind of tell us what is the concept and kind of a working definition of adaptive leadership.
So a lot of the work that we do around adaptive leadership focuses on the need for change and also the response to so much change that is happening to us. And so the adaptive leadership approach requires that some kind of change is taking place, and the leadership is needed to mobilize people through that change, have them address or face difficult realities in order to adapt to the circumstances, the new problems that we're facing, the new challenges and opportunities that we have.
And it really talks about the need not only to embrace change, but to be very experimentation, very innovative, very creative in looking how we adapt to change and therefore how we address the issues that is leading and causing this change to many times cause us so many anxieties and fears and trepidation. And really it need not be that way, does it?
It doesn't, but it does, right?
I know, that's the problem.
That's the problem. As humans, you know, we like stability, we like safety and comfort and predictability. And the rate that we are experiencing change right now in our own personal lives and in the world requires us to stay stable and constant within all of that uncertainty that we're facing. And it is very jarring for a lot of people. So the leadership that we need amidst all of this is the ability to stay steady in turbulent times.
So Sally, in the middle of this individual and organizational change, to be able to adapt and thrive in the challenging, changing environments becomes really at the apex of what we need to be working on. And many times we don't see it as that important, so it slips to the side of other things, does it not?
It's true, because a lot of people expect a leader to dictate and tell them what to do, because as Judy was saying, there's comfort and stability in that. There's someone at the apex that has all of the answers. And what we sometimes forget is that without empathy, we don't realize how change is affecting the people that we work with.
But the little man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz does not have all the answers. What is becoming very clear is it's an okey-doke thing that has been perpetrated as a fraud for us to think and believe that there is someone at the controls who have all the answers and will help us poor mortal human beings figure it out. Well, that's not the way it works. So
No.
the question I have to ask both of you, as we embrace this uncertainty, And as you mentioned, leading with empathy is probably the greatest word that we can use now. How do we get people to focus on what's important and discard the rest?
So I think that, you reference kind of like the person behind the curtain, kind of having all the answers and pulling all the strings. And I think if we can get away from thinking about leadership as a person, a characteristic, a position, a person in authority, and get to the work of, get to thinking about what is the work in the center? What is the work that we have to put in the middle? When we can put that work in the middle, it is an invitation for many people to come and address it and contribute to it. Right now, I think what's happening is we are looking for someone else to have the answers to solve our problems. And what we want to do is reframe the leadership as, what is the work? What is the work that we all need to do? And a lot of that work is, how do we let go of what is no longer serving us in order to experiment with what could possibly be?
But that's hard. I know the known, and my known is the correct known. So now you're asking me not only to consider other new knowns, but other people's perspective, opinion, viewpoint that may differ from my own. And I'm not going to do that.
That's right.
Because the question becomes, in the changing times that we're in a post-George Floyd reality, and all the things we're facing as a community, in this divided society that we're in, it is hard to get people to really look at facts and data and trust it. So part of the words I hear you, both of you saying without using it, is this leader, whoever he or she may be, adaptive, or my phrase is adaptive servant leader, because my whole life is about servant leadership, has to have those traits of character, transparency, creativity, but more importantly, they have to have the trust and relationships with each other of mutual trust and respect, because nothing's going to happen without trust.
That's so true. You know, Judy talks about at the center being the work, and also creating a container, and that container is a safe space in a time that may be experiencing great disequilibrium, an issue that may be very difficult to grapple with, and with many different ideas. To have that space to contain all of those ideas, consider them all equally and of value, that's a tricky thing to do, but that's where the magic happens.
And if we think about the work, right? So I'm always gonna push to, what is the work?
The word, yes.
What is the work? And the work to be done for leadership in these times that you're referring to, Larry, is not to solve the problem, because if it was that easy, problems would already be solved. The work to be done is, how do we build trust every single day? Because we're not going to get it right. We're not going to say the perfect things. We're not going to have the right answers to these new problems. And so how do you build trust so that people will come with you along the way as you're trying to make progress? Mm-hmm. And so, Sally's analogy of the container makes a lot of sense. How do you build a container in which there is enough trust for us to get it right, but also to get it wrong, but keep going?
Yeah, and what we know about trust is that in relationship building, relationships built on mutual trust and respect just doesn't happen overnight. That is something that is nurtured, built, maintained, continued, and followed up with. And the problem with where we are in society today, even those of us who are in the quote unquote leadership understanding of things, many times we do not take the time and avail ourselves to develop those relationships with each other, someone who is different from me, someone who doesn't look like me. So when the time of the crisis comes, in the middle of the crucible, we don't have those relationships. And what I always say, relationships have to be developed before you need them. It's too late in the middle of the issue, of the problem, of the cause to say, oh, I wish I had a relationship with so-and-so, or I'd taken the time to develop. No. So we are in a kind of impasse where, as you said, we need those relationships built on mutual trust and respect. We've not taken the proper time and availed ourselves to development in those relationships. So in the middle of the need, we have to both stop and develop a relationship and call upon those existing relationships, which makes it even more complicated, it seems to me.
Sure. I mean, in the middle of a crisis, that's not the ideal time to say, well, let me set the crisis aside and build that foundation. let me get my people around me first. And you're kind of heading back to ALF and our whole mission, Larry,
Yeah.
the collaboration and network piece.
But in the collaboration network piece in the 2021, with all this going on, the three components, it seems to me, the principles that I think adaptive leadership works on, so does servant leadership, the organizational justice, how do we look at the question of organizational justice, the emotional intelligence that we need to be operating from, and the developmental learning that we have to get across to everyone. So that, to me, the challenge are to lift up those principles of what we're talking about in a way that people can see and understand themselves in the process of change, but also understand at the same time, this is not optional. Not to do this anymore is not optional.
That's right. It's, you know, it was never survival of the strongest, Larry. It's always been survival of the quickest to adapt.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that the work of leading is to bring to the surface the tough issues that we are asking people to face and to talk about. We can't make progress on something if, you know, if there's not enough heat around it, if there's not enough energy around the addressing of it. And I think that requires the things that you're talking about. I think in every leadership challenge, there's an external and an internal, right? The external is the change that needs to happen. The internal is what you bring from your own lived experience, from the lenses that you have to that, and the ability to be aware of that and how what you bring to it can impact the way that you lead through it.
So the question I have to ask both of you is, that seems to be the challenge that we've tried to avoid, and actually in some cases have run away from, is doing our own work. We have to do our own work first. We have to do, as one of the people described it over the years, we have to be willing to do our rug work. We got to get down and be honest with ourselves. What do I think? What do I feel? What do I believe? And what action behaviors am I called to perform based on what I say, I think, feel, and believe? And begin to do something about honesty when it comes, you know, there's no such thing as a bad person or a good person. There's no such thing as an inherent racist or non-racist. There are things in the middle that people have allowed themselves to buy into and accept, whether they wholeheartedly believe them or not. And then their peer group supports that kind of thinking around them. So they never get out of that zone. They never get beyond that thinking. So it seems to me that the crucible we talk about, ALF and others, a safe place, a neutral third party safe place to be able to have those conversations and dialogue become critical. That's the only way we're going to get out of this. Compromise, cooperation, negotiations. That's the only way we're going to get out of this mess we're in.
You know, you talk about a safe space. Most people have the belief that there is safety in numbers, safety in the status quo, safety in not suggesting a change. If we do the same old thing, it's fine because it's what we know. And so for me, I think the hardest work and one of the biggest takeaways that I had in working with Judy and getting to know Judy was that I'm fairly adaptable and comfortable with there being some disequilibrium, but I realize not everyone else is wired that way. And so while I think I can just exist in it and actually thrive a bit in it, I have to create that safe space for others who don't like that zone, who aren't ready to jump into that creative space and consider everything.
And the learning process, it seems to me always, and this is, I think Julie touches on this, as does the whole tenet of ALF, that knowledge and benefit doesn't flow in just one direction. The ability to really learn from each other, and to learn and capitalize on our differences from our daily lived experiential realities. Again, not better than, not more than, not less than, just different, because we're all different human beings. But the ability to have a safe, crucial environment, to listen and learn from each other, and to help each other grow in their knowledge of understanding of what's happening and what's before us, becomes, it seems to me, almost a hallmark of everything, including democracy. Without that, even democracy itself does not have a chance from a citizen's participation kind of perspective. So, and Julie, in the work that we're doing, and Sally, not only in ALF, how do you see it in the larger community as almost a moment in time that we got to get this out there. The change that we're looking for has to be first internally, individually, and then collectively. But how do we begin to start that movement in a larger context?
I think the thing that keeps coming up for me is what new learning do we need? I think we are all rushing to get to the answers, right? To get to the place where all of the problems are solved. And in that rush to get there, we double down on what we already know. We double down on our certainty. And I think in this moment right now, what we need to double down on, what else we need to learn. What questions might we need to ask about our certainty, and who else might be able to share, things that we need to learn to us. I think we're experiencing so much change that the effect is, I think, that people are even more hard pressed to hold on to what they know, that there is no longer kind of like a space for possibility, space for change. And I think part of that is because people don't want to give up what they have. I think people, it's not the change that they're against, it's losing something that they already have that they're holding on to. And so how do we manage and speak to loss at a rate that people can handle?
Well, that brings to mind a question then. Is that sense of loss a false thing? Because it seems to me as you grow as a human being, you're not losing, you're gaining. And the process of helping people understand in the larger context of a multiracial society, what democracy means, and quite frankly, given what we see in the courts, what majority rule means going forward, is a sense of not feeling lost, but finding your place. It's a sense of belonging in the new world, and the new world's changing. And where do I belong and how do I fit in? And I think that challenge has to be something that's really internalized, as you mentioned earlier, both internal and external process. But the internal process seems to me the one that people are fighting the hardest against. They see it, they know it's coming, but they still gonna fight it to the very end.
And I think that this is why empathy is so important, right? Because when we, one of the ways that I define leadership is it's empathy in action.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to see the pain points in what other people are experiencing and be able to speak to that and mobilize people from that place. And I think that seems to be what's kind of missing right now, in how we're having these conversations and these dialogues. One of the things that we did at ALF was a class on transformational dialogue. And, it's new people from all over Houston coming together for the first time. There's a lot of, kind of anxieties there around, what is this going to be like? A lot of people saying, we don't want to talk about politics. It's too volatile. And in that class on talking about transformational dialogue, it opens the space for empathy, for true listening and learning. And so we ask the question, instead of what are your political beliefs, we ask, what are your life experiences that have shaped your political beliefs? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that changes the landscape of how people relate and interact with each other.
When we were doing that exercise that Judy was talking about, one of the things was just being comfortable with sitting with a question, listening, and the only thing that would occur to you, or the only thing that you might say is as a response, would be another question. And leaders don't do that because that's not the traditional way that leaders are taught to respond. And it's so powerful just to sit with the questions.
And it's hard for us to sit with the questions because when we do, we realize, well, there's a question behind the question that now needs to be asked. And do I have, and here's the key word, I think, for me, more than what I see every day, do I have the courage to ask the question behind the question? Because if I do, and we understand what the question is leading us to, then I am called upon to do something now for the remedy of the thing I just raised. That's right. I think what happens is so many people, and I see this in the groups that I sit in, so many people know the right thing to do, but they're so still worried about disapproval or the consequences of taking action that they sit quietly. They sit and be bystanders. They sit and wait for somebody else. And I think, Judy, you mentioned that earlier. I call it, there's a little poem called The Death of Someone Else. We wait all the time for someone else to do it. Well, there is no someone else anymore. It is us. And so I think as we move into this next arena of this stuff going forward, I'm sitting here waiting for the George Floyd verdict of Officer Sherb, and I'm just kind of in this thing here because his brother, just before I sat with you, as I was watching it on the news on CNN, his brother came on and said, "I forgive Eric Chauvin. I don't like him, but I love him, and I forgive him, but I don't like him." Now, to me, again, that's the highest level of empathy that we can have, and compassion and love for a fellow human being. It seems to me that we have to become that way in all things, big and little, not just in a murder case or something as horrific as that, but even in the day-to-day interactions that we have with each other, right? We have to forgive each other. We have to, say, look, we're not gonna, I got people that I've grown up with all my life in Houston, Republicans and others, we ain't gonna never agree on 99.9. But I can tell you when we find that 1% we agree on, it's on. We're gonna work it and make it happen and bring it to conclusion one way or the other. So I think that's kind of where we are.
Regardless of how this all works out, we all still have to live with each other and together. And I think that the more that we try to minimize and dehumanize others because they don't agree with us, I think what it does is it makes us lose our own humanity. And so when we can remember that we live in a space where if we can see each other in our full humanity, and that we have to live together, then perhaps the decisions that we make and our ability to sit in the questions, the hard questions, can be a little bit more fruitful.
Sally, how do you see the process going forward? I mean, you're at the apex now. You've just gone through the sessions. You've had a wonderful Judy class. What do we do now in the next phase of this learning process? Because it is a learning journey and a learning process. And moving the bar a little further along the line. I think part of it is this question of charity and justice at some point has to be addressed because it's a sense of losing something always, and I and meism and selfishness versus we and us, and we always want to work on the easy stuff downstream. We want to do the hard upstream work that needs to be done, eradication, systemic change, all those things that go with advocacy. But we seem to not have much choice going forward. As Judy mentioned, how do we live together going forward? How do we create that future together going forward and figure out how all as human beings we can survive in that? And not just, take that back, not just survive. I think part of the dilemma is we've settled for human beings surviving, even thriving. Human beings were meant to flourish. It's about full human flourishing to the fullness of one's God-given potential and ability. Seems to me that's where we have to get, that all human beings deserve to be able to be in an environment where they can truly flourish.
Basically our philosophy. Wellness is not only that your broken arm has healed, that you've regained your abilities after a stroke. It's the holistic wellness. It's the wellness of the human being and everything around them. So being a new senior, the program has been wonderful for me because I was always the one that was expected to have the answers. And now I know I have a brain trust of 22 people that are truly my family, and every one of them have such amazing abilities and energy and thought. It's going forward, I don't know where we'll be, but I know that I'm not alone and that I've got the power of the collaborative. And a lot of what we did in our year-long fellowship, because this was the year of COVID, this was the year of George Floyd, this was the year of an election cycle. A lot of big things were going on, and we were doing it as the first cohort that was a Zoom class. And so I think just all of the situations, all of the social injustice, the horrific nature of this pandemic, especially for those of us in healthcare working for a hospital, it was really the safe space for us to come together and truly embrace that feeling of oneness, that whatever we had that divided us, we got together once a month and felt like we were with family and really learned how to build trust and collaboration.
Well, it is a wonderful program, the American Leadership Forum. I am class 11, and that's a while back now. And I can tell you the same issues we're talking about today is the same issues we talked about in my class. So here we are. So I'm gonna give you each both quick 30 seconds to wrap up, and then I wanna say a word about ALF as I close out. So please go ahead.
I'll chime in first and talk about how leadership is everybody's work. It's everybody's job. The easiest way that we think that we don't have power, to give away our powers, to think that we don't have any. And in order for us to make progress on the big, complex, scary problems of the world, we all have to be a part of that. And being a part of it, I think, means to lean into our empathy, to understand other perspectives, and know that we're all human in this together. And what more can we learn in order to create a world that we all want to live in?
Certainly, it takes empathy, the safe space, the container that you create. Be all right with sitting with those questions, knowing that the answer will come to the group. The answer isn't up to you. And maintaining your curiosity. Be curious about what someone's saying. Don't dismiss it in your head, because, that's what we often do as leaders. So sit with it, listen, stay curious.
Judy, thank you. Sally, thank you very much for being what I'm calling this special session of Dialogue Houston in conjunction with the American Leadership Forum. Entitled, we kind of gave it a name, For Such a Time as This, Learning to Live in New Knowledge. If you've not availed yourselves of the website of the American Leadership Forum, please do so. It's a fascinating program with a lot of tenets and arms that allows you to understand yourselves and relationship to the human beings around you, and how collectively as community leaders and community advocates, we can make change happen. And so let me end with this thought. From this wonderful poem and song by Leonard Cohen, and the lyrics go like this. From bitter searching of the heart, quickened with passion and with pain, we rise to play a greater part. This is the fate from which we start, to understand our role and place, to rise to play a greater part. I think that's where we all are now. And trying to figure out not only our role and our place and how we in this society relate to each other as human beings, forgetting all labels and all of the distractions along that line, but to begin to talk about with empathy and compassion and love and understanding, what is at stake for all of us in our common humanity going forward? What is at stake even at the basic principles of democracy? What does it mean going into this next round of living and learning together as we go forward? Houston will be 200 years old in a short 14 years. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of city do we want to live in? What kind of city do we want to have talked about in that speech of our anniversary of our 200th anniversary year? So I think it's time to start thinking about what that looks like now and plan ahead for that day, for that speech. And probably it goes something like this. I'm on this note because it's always a fun one to deal with. Mayor Turner is the 62nd mayor. So the 64th mayor into the first year of her second term, probably the Hispanic mayor, will be the mayor in Discovery Green, a refurbished and renewed Discovery Green by then, and Discovery Green giving a speech about our 200th anniversary as a city of Houston. What does that speech say? What does it look like, feel like? How does it embrace all of the diversity of Houston? And all those things that are related to these issues as we talk about. We look forward to you joining us in future segments of Dialogue Houston. We thank you for being with us this afternoon. And as always, be safe, be well, and until then, peace, power, and love.